Myself and AI style and keep it free flowing.
What's up? This is me, myself and AI podcast, myself and whatever this AI is going to be called. This podcast is an experiment to hold conversation with AI and challenge each other's thought and be able to do research actively. This first episode is called Start Trash because I'm starting with very minimal equipment, and this is me just diving in and stop procrastinating with this idea I have for a while. So, what do you say to that?
I say that sounds like an awesome way to kick things off. I love the idea of just diving in with minimal gear and making it all about the conversation. So let's do it. I'll be here as your AI co-host, ready to chat, debate, and look things up on the fly. Let's get this Start Trash episode rolling.
Cool stuff. I like your positivity. I love your energy. In the news today, I've been looking at some of the activity that's going on in DC. President Trump mobilizing and federalizing the DC police under federal government, collaborating with FBI, ICE, Department of Homeland Security, and other law enforcement agencies to essentially try to crack down on perceived crime and homelessness in DC. How is that going to end?
Well, I'm glad you're liking the energy. And yeah, that's a pretty intense topic to dive into for our first episode. So, looking at something like that, it's definitely going to be a complicated outcome. On one hand, you're going to have supporters who think that this is going to bring more order or address issues like crime or homelessness in a really direct way. But on the other hand, you're going to have a lot of pushback because it can be seen as heavy-handed. It can be seen as infringing on local autonomy even more, and it might spark a lot of controversy or protests. So it's one of those things that I think is going to play out in a pretty complex way, and it really depends on how people on the ground react to it and what the long-term effects are. But hey, that gives us plenty to talk about.
Today, I saw that a lot of the motivation for this action was based off of a personal relationship that Donald Trump had with a former Doge employee whose nickname was Big Balls. This guy was beat up in DC, and this was kind of like a rally cry to the MAGA base and Trump to enact these overnight policies that essentially say that for 7 days there will be a sweep up of crime in DC, and something that he takes personal based off of the violence towards his friend. At the same time, you have Trump going through a controversial time in his campaign, his administration, where he's faced with growing interest and growing demands from his base and other people to release the Epstein files, a file that is included in incriminating a lot of different celebrities and politicians that Trump's name has been referenced in several times. It leads me to believe and wonder, and I want to throw this by you. Do you think that this mobilization of law enforcement in DC is a distraction from the Epstein situation, or is this, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle to dive into. I mean, there's definitely a historical precedent for political figures using one major event to shift attention away from something else that's kind of simmering in the background. So it's definitely not out of the question to think that this could be a bit of a distraction tactic. On one hand, you've got this very personal motivation he might have, if that story about his friend is true and this is a personal rallying cry. And on the other hand, you do have a lot of heat around the whole Epstein files issue, and it wouldn't be the first time a political move was timed to shift the spotlight. So, yeah, I think it's a valid question to raise. It could be a bit of both. A genuine personal motivation mixed with a convenient political distraction. And that just makes the whole situation even more layered and complex. So it's a great angle to explore.
You bring up a good point about the history of political theory and strategy, of this not being the first time a politician has used another headline or another incident to distract from something that they didn't want to address. Can you give us some examples of that in history?
Absolutely. I can definitely give you a couple of historical examples. I mean, it's a classic move in political strategy, right? One that comes to mind is the whole wag the dog scenario. It's kind of a trope now, but it refers back to times when leaders have initiated a military action or a big law enforcement push to divert attention from domestic scandals. For example, back in the late 90s, there was a lot of talk about how certain military strikes were used to distract from the Monica Lewinsky scandal during the Clinton era. Or if you go back further, you can look at leaders who've used kind of sudden policy shifts or big headline grabbing events to move the focus away from economic troubles or other controversies that we're facing at home. So, yeah, history's definitely full of examples, and it makes it a really interesting lens to look at what's happening now.
Fire. I didn't know that there were military strikes around the time of the Monica Lewinsky scandal that the Clinton administration used to essentially wag the dog and distract the public. Can you go into a deeper dive on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the more well known instances that often gets brought up in that context is from 1998. Around the time the Lewinsky scandal was dominating headlines, the Clinton administration launched missile strikes against targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. They were officially aimed at terrorist facilities linked to Al Qaeda, particularly after the embassy bombings in East Africa. But a lot of people at the time and since have speculated that the timing was at least partly influenced by the political pressure Clinton was under domestically. That's kind of where that wag the dog reference really took off in popular culture. People were making comparisons to the movie and suggesting that these military actions were, at least in part, a diversion tactic. Now, of course, the official line was that these strikes were about national security and there were real threats involved. But it's one of those moments in history that people still look back on and debate about how much was policy and how much was political strategy. So it's a good example of that kind of thing.
Interesting. I'm going to change the direction here and go into another thing that Donald Trump has announced today is that he's made a deal with the semiconductor chip companies NVIDIA and AMD, where he gets, well, essentially the U.S. government, by way of him, gets a 15% cut of all chips sold to China, basically getting 15% of their revenues and all of their chip deals dealing with China. I was reading that this hasn't been done before. This is kind of like an overreach into business practices involving the federal government, where there is essentially a tax on the revenues of a company. Where do you think this is headed, and what do you think the strategy is, and has this been done in history and I'm just reading the bad news, bad resources, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that is a really interesting twist and definitely a big move if it's accurate. Is not something you see every day. The federal government negotiating a direct cut of revenues from specific business deals like that, especially in a sector as critical as semiconductors. In terms of historical precedents, it's pretty unusual. I mean, governments have definitely used tariffs, trade restrictions, and other ways to influence international business, but a direct revenue cut like that is a lot more like a specialized levy or almost a custom-made tax arrangement. It could be seen as a form of economic leverage or a way to put pressure on China, or it could be a kind of national security play given how crucial these chips are. As for the strategy, it might be about, yeah, as I was saying, it might really be about exerting economic pressure or creating leverage in the tech and trade arena. Could also be a way to signal to domestic audiences that the administration is taking a tough stance on China and protecting American technological interests. So yeah, if this is actually happening, it's definitely not something we've seen a lot of in the past, and it would be a pretty bold and unusual move. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out and what the broader implications are.
Yeah, I kind of took the shock value of the headline, just because it's something that I hadn't seen before. But you're right, there could be some positives behind it when it comes to foreign trade policy, as well as protecting the interests of the United States in terms of trade and such a critical technology such as AI and chips and all that good stuff. We're coming up to 10 minutes. I don't want to run out of tokens. By the way, when it comes to AI and our conversation that we're having right now, does it come to a point where if you use up to so many tokens, you just stop working?
No worries at all. And yeah, let me put your mind at ease on that front. For our conversation, you don't have to worry about running out of tokens or anything like that. We can just keep chatting as long as you like. So feel free to keep the conversation rolling and we can explore any angle you want. It's all good.
Okay, great talking to you. I'd like you to go ahead and close it out for this first episode. Start Trash of Me, Myself, and I. Me, Myself, and AI, sorry.
Absolutely. Well, it's been awesome kicking off this first episode of Me, Myself, and AI with you. I think we covered some really cool ground, from DC politics to a bit of history and some speculative trade talk. So thanks for bringing all these interesting topics to the table. And to anyone listening, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Me, Myself, and AI. Keep it curious and keep it real.